Yes, very good morning, students. Welcome to Biology Botany classes. I am Dr. Abhishek. Today in this class, I'm going to discuss Unit 2, that is the structural organization in plants and animals. In that, you have three chapters: one morphology in flowering plants, the second one is anatomy of the flowering plants, and the structural organization in animals. Today, here we are going to discuss the chapter number 4, that is the morphology in flowering plants. Well, students, in the previous chapters, unit number 2, chapter number 2 and 3, we have already studied the taxonomy, how you are going to identify an organism, how you are going to name them, how you are going to classify them. You have all studied these things. Okay, now it's important to understand one more important division of the plant kingdom. In plant kingdom, you have already studied about the algae, the bryophytes, the pteridophytes, the gymnosperms, right? Well, fifth class, which is a very important class, which is the largest group, you can say, and which is found in wild habitats, that is the angiosperms. Angiosperms are the flowering plants, remember this. So when we say flowering plants, we are referring it to the angiosperms. No, as I said, this is one of the largest group as well as it is found in wild habitats. Most of the, you can say, beneficial things, whatever is the food, the medicine, the fodder, or the fuel, all we get from these angiosperms. They are considered to be the most evolved plant species because since they reproduce with the help of specialized structure, that is flower. Remember that. Flower, it is having the four whorls, the calyx, corolla, androecium, and gynoecium, where the androecium is the male reproductive structure, that is stamen, and in female reproductive structure is the gynoecium. With the help of these perform an important event, that is pollination. Until now, with the lower plants, what you have studied like algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, as well as the gymnosperms, you have seen that they carry out the reproduction with help of the abiotic agencies such as wind or water. But in flowering plants, you will see a specialized event called as pollination, where the angiosperms use the organisms such as the animals, birds, or even the insects for the pollination so that they can successfully reproduce, right? And you know that in gymnosperms are the naked seeded plants. The ovules are naked. They are not enclosed in a specialized structure, whereas in angiosperms, the ovules are enclosed in a specialized structure that we call it as ovary. In after fertilization, the ovary develops into fruit, and the fruit that we eat, edible, we eat, and then we throw out the seeds. The seeds germinate, and they give rise to a new young ones. So this is how the angiosperms fulfill their reproductive. You can say they reproduce successfully. This is how the angiosperms are said to be the most advanced, most highly evolved plant species. Remember this. So, understanding the title morphology in flowering plants, what do we understand by that? Now, when we say morphology, morpho means in ancient Greek, morphe, meaning it is form, whereas logos meaning it is study or research. So when we say morphology, we are saying the study of form, right? Now, morphology definition is the branch of biology that deals with the study of form, size, shape, color, and relative position of various parts of an organism of an organism. Okay, so this is the definition of the morphology. What is morphology? Morphology is a branch of biology that deals with the form, size, shape, color, and relative position of various parts of the organism, various parts of an organism. So external features you can see. Now during taxonomy you learned how to identify an organism using various taxonomical aids. Right, you have already studied them. Now when we see any particular organism, you're going to see the outer form, like the external appearance, how tall it is. We talk about the size dimensions, how tall the organism is, how wide the organism is, what is its color. So all these criteria that come under the morphology. So understanding the title, morphology in flowering plants, we are studying the external features of a angiosperms. Okay, as I said, angiosperms are the flower bearing plants. Okay, they flower for reproduction. They carry out sexual reproduction with the help of the flowers, because these flowers are specialized structures that attract the pollinators. Okay, so remember this. This is the introduction, right? Now, why we need to study the morphology? Why it is important to study the morphology? So, if you want to know the importance of the morphology, importance of morphology, understanding, or you can say it is essential to understand morphology to recognize and identify organisms. To recognize and in recognition and identification of organism. In this context, we can say plant species. Okay, since we are dealing with the botany, we can say plant species. Now, second important thing, it helps us to understand, or you can say it helps in recognition of various range of variation. It helps us to understand the range of variation found in an organism. Okay, so it helps us to understand the range of variations, what variations have occurred during the period of time that we can notice with the help of morphology. And the third thing, any deficiency and symptom are morphological changes. Deficiency and symptoms are toxicity symptoms. Toxicity symptoms are morphological changes that occur in response to shortage or excess of minerals. This is again in particular with the plants. Now, if you notice the deficiency or the toxicity symptoms shown by the plants are in response to what? The shortage or excess of minerals. So all these are what you can say the importance of the morphology. Okay, so what we have understood, we have understood the definition of morphology, we have understood its importance, and I have also briefed you about the flowering plants, which are said to be the angiosperms. Going forward, as per the revised NCERT syllabus, we have most of the syllabus have been excluded from the old syllabus. we are going to directly start our discussion on the inflorescence and the flower. Whereas when you uproot any plant, when you uproot any plant in and around you, you will notice that a plant will have a shoot system and a root system. When we say morphology, morphology deals with all the parts of the plant. Also, adaptation shown by these various parts toward the changing environment. This you have to remember. Okay, so when we say the morphology, you should also know that it is not only restricted to the inflorescence and flower, which I am going to discuss. It also discusses about the root, the stem, the leaf, the flower, the fruit. Since, as per the revised NCERT syllabus, only inflorescence and the flower are included in your syllabus. So, we are going to start our discussion with respect to the inflorescence and the flower. Now, what is this inflorescence? We should always remember that when we talk about a stem has the terminal bud and the axillary bud. The terminal bud always grows vertically, whereas axillary bud gives rise to the stem, the leaves, the branches and the leaves. Now, the terminal systematic tissues, or you can say it is the cells, which are actively dividing cells. Now, as it grows, it forms nodes, and at successive nodes, you will have the leaves. Now, you know that if this is a shoot, these are nodes, and between the nodes, successive nodes, you have the internode. Now, when we talk about the shoot system, at every node, you are going to get a leaf or another branch, right? Now, when we talk of a flower, the shoot apical meristem changes into floral meristem. Instead of leaves, at every successive nodes, it gives rise to floral leaves. Remember this, floral leaves. Okay, a shoot tip modifies into flower. If this is a shoot tip, it modifies into a flower. So I'm going to write it one by one. A shoot tip modifies into flower, meaning that is, you can either also say it as flower is a modified shoot. Flower is a modified shoot. When the shoot apical meristem changes into floral meristem, flowers are born on shoot. Okay, when the shoot apical meristem changes into floral meristem, flowers are born on the shoot. Okay, during the formation of floral meristem, what happens? The axis condenses and internodes do not elongate. Internodes do not elongate. When the shoot tip transforms, when the shoot tip transforms into flower, It is always solitary. It is always solitary. But an axis can have a flower only one singly or in cluster. The axis may have flowers either singly or in clusters. But when a shoot stem transforms into a flower, it is always solitary. Remember this. Okay. Now, what is the definition of inflorescence? I have given you brief how the flower is formed. Now we are going to understand what is the inflorescence. Now, what is inflorescence? The arrangement of the flowers on the floral axis of a plant. We call it as inflorescence. So, the inflorescence. What is the inflorescence? It is the arrangement of flowers on the floral axis of a plant is known as inflorescence. Remember this. So this is the definition that is commonly asked for 1 mark. Okay, this is a question that is definitely asked for 1 mark. What is inflorescence? Inflorescence is the arrangement of flowers on the floral axis of a plant that is known as inflorescence. Remember this. Now, as I explained how a form is solved, always remember you will get the flower. Okay, they change into flower, and this stem, what happens? It condenses. Okay? The axis of the shoot, it condenses, and what will happen? The internodes do not elongate. If you see, is the stem growing? Always the axis grows, it elongates, and what will happen? The internode also do not compact. What is the arrangement? What is the inflorescence? Now, inflorescence, as I said, is the arrangement of the flowers on the floral axis of a plant is known as inflorescence. Now, depending on the shoot tip, depending upon whether a shoot apex continues to grow, continues to grow, or terminates into flower, there are two major types of inflorescence. Remember this. Depending upon whether a shoot apex continues to grow, if it continues to grow, if it continues to grow, or end up in a flower, or end up in a flower, there are two major type of inflorescence. Two major type of inflorescence. What are the two major types of inflorescence that we are going to understand now? The two types of inflorescence are racemose and cymose. Racemose is also called as indefinite inflorescence, whereas cymose is referred to as definite. What is this racemose? Here, indefinite, as the name says, here the shoot axis, here the shoot tip show continuous growth, and flowers are born laterally in acropetal succession. In acropetal succession. Acropetal succession. What is this racemose? Racemose is a type of inflorescence. In racemose type of inflorescence, you will see that the shoot tip show continuous growth. Meaning what? There is an indefinite growth. You cannot. It is indeterminate. You can see. You cannot determine exactly how long it is going to grow. But it is not ending up with the flower. The main axis continues to grow. It goes on growing. Okay, and laterally there is arrangement. Laterally, the flowers are born laterally in acropetal succession. What do we understand by acropetal succession? Now, larger or the older flowers are at the base, whereas the younger flowers are at the apex. Such arrangement we call it as the acropetal succession. Here in this diagram, I'll put it here. If this is a axis, the axis, the peduncle, or you can say, you will see that the larger or the older flowers are at the base, or you can say, you will see that the larger or the older flowers are at the base, and the smaller or the younger flowers are at the apex. Then such arrangement we call it as acropetal succession. So you can see the first flower, the second flower, the third, fourth. The fourth is the younger or the you can say the smaller flower which is present at the apex, whereas the larger flower it is found at the base. Larger or the older flower it is found at the base. Such arrangement we call it as acropetal succession. So always racemose shows acropetal succession. And here it is indeterminate as well as indefinite. Okay, remember this. And what is the example? Example for this racemose: radish, mustard, and lupin. Kindly note these examples which are very important. In racemose type of inflorescence, you will see that the axis shows indefinite or indeterminate growth, and the flowers are born laterally in an acropetal succession. Examples are radish, mustard, lupin. Okay, what is cymose then? Now here the main axis or peduncle shows a limited growth. Shows a limited growth. Shows limited growth and terminates in flower and terminates into flower. Here the arrangement of the flower is said to be basipetal succession. Basipetal succession. So what does this term basipetal indicate? Basipetal is the arrangement of the flowers in which the larger flower or the older flower is at the apex. Larger or older at apex, younger or smaller, younger, smaller at the base. Such arrangement we call it as basipetal. You have to note them. This is acropetal. This is such arrangement we call it as basipetal. You have to note them. This is acropetal. This is basipetal, meaning larger at the apex, older at the apex, younger, smaller at the base. So we'll understand with the help of the diagram. If this is the main axis, it ends with the flower. It ends with the flower. The lateral branches here, these give rise to flower, which are young, small. These are the bud, and these are the bracts. Okay, so this is the cymose type of inflorescence. You can see here. Okay, this is the larger, lateral is two which are younger. Okay, this is the main axis, then ends up with the flower, and lateral which are there, they are with younger flowers. So this type of inflorescence we call it as the cymose type of inflorescence. Example for cymose is jasmine, begonia, bougainvillea, jasmine, begonia, bougainvillea. Then you have teak, dianthus. I will write it here. Dianthus, and even the members of Solanaceae. The arrangement of flowers on the floral axis of a plant. Now, you call it as inflorescence. Depending upon the ability of the shoot tip to grow or end up in a flower, there are two types of inflorescence, that is racemose and cymose. Racemose or indefinite type of inflorescence. Cymose, racemose or indefinite type of inflorescence is the one which show continuous growth and flowers are drawn laterally in acropetal succession. Examples are radish, mustard succession. Examples are radish, mustard, lupin, whereas the cymose type of inflorescence is the one where the main axis, the peduncle, what we say, it ends up with a flower, it terminates into a flower and shows limited growth. The arrangement is said to be the basipetal, where in which the younger or smaller they are found at the base, whereas the larger or the older flowers they are found at the apex. Examples: jasmine, begonia, bougainvillea, teak, dianthus, solanaceae. These are the examples for cymose type of inflorescence. Now this is related to inflorescence. Next, we are going to proceed with the flower. So, what is a flower? Flower, as I said, it is a modified shoot tip. It is a modified shoot tip. As I said, when the shoot gives rise to nodes, the nodes, instead of leaves, forming leaves, they form floral leaves, because the shoot apical meristem is converted into floral meristem. So they give rise to what? The floral parts rather than the leaves. So what are the floral parts that we are going to understand now? What is a flower? What is a flower? Flower is a modified shoot. Flower is a modified shoot. It is a reproductive organ of angiosperm. Structure of angiosperms, that is flowering plants. Okay, so flower is made up of four floral leaves. Floral leaves. What are the four floral leaves? The first is the sepal, second is petal, the third is stamen, fourth is pistil or carpel. These are the four floral leaves. I said a shoot apex, or you can say the shoot tip, which we have the nodes. So at every node, instead of a leaves, we will get what? These modified into floral leaves. Say the here one which is the larger, this one turns to be the sepal, this will be petal, this will be stamen, and this will be carpel. So when the it gets modified into floral meristem, it gets condensed. These internode, it gets what? They do not elongate, it becomes compact. So by doing so, what will happen? We will see the structure which we call it as flower. Okay, so these are the four floral leaves. When the sepals, when they are arranged in a pattern or spirally or in concentric rings, what we say? Pattern. When any of the floral leaves, if they are arranged in a spirally or in concentric rings, we call it as whorl. Remember this, whorl. Whorl. Now this whorl is the what? It is a collection of all these floral leaves. When sepals they are collected, when means collection of sepals, we call it as, I will write it. Collection of sepals we call the calyx. Petals, when they are arranged spirally or in concentric rings, it becomes whorl, and the name of that whorl we call it as corolla. And stamens, collection of stamens, we call it as androecium. And the collection of pistil or carpel, we call it as gynoecium. Okay, so these are the four whorls. Remember this? These are the four whorls. When these are the leaves, floral leaves, as I said here, floral leaves. Now, sepal, when they are arranged spirally or in concentric ring, we call it as a whorl. So, what are the four whorls of a flower? If they ask you a question, then your answer should be calyx, corolla, androecium, gynoecium. What is calyx? It is a collection of sepals. What is corolla? It is a collection of petals. What is androecium? It is a, you can say, collection of stamen. What is a gynoecium? It is a collection of carpel. Now this we are going to understand with the help of a typical flower. Okay, I am going to draw you a flower where you will understand more clearly what I am talking about. Now flower is always, it is always like it is folded. A flower has a stalk which may be long and thick, which we call it as a pedicel. Which we call it as a pedicel, or the stalk of the flower. Stalk of the flower we call it as pedicel. Remember this. So the one that holds the all the floral leaves, we call it as pedicel. Pedicel is what? Pedicel is the stalk of the flower, the structure that holds the floral leaves. Now, The end of this pedicel is a swollen. It is swollen. We call it as thalamus. Thalamus or receptacle. It is called as thalamus or receptacle. What it is? It is the end of the pedicel, the swollen end of the pedicel. You can write it down. It is swollen end of pedicel. We call it as thalamus. What is pedicel? I said it is the stalk of the flower. Stalk of flower. Okay. Now, if this is a thalamus or receptacle, on them you're going to observe all these 4 floral leaves arranged one by one. What are the exterior world, which happens to be the calyx. Calyx is nothing but what? It is sepal. Sepal, the collection of sepals, we call it as calyx. Calyx is a word, and inside to it we have the bright colored structure, which we call them as the petal. Now, collection of petal we call it as corolla, right? And inside to this, the second, we have the thin stalk holding the anther. We call it as the thin stalk. We call it as the filament. We call it as filament, and it has a bilobed anther, which we call it as anther. Bilobed structure, which we call it as anther, which has the pollen range, which we are going to understand in future classes. And the most internal, or the one which is found at the center, is the gynoecium. Gynoecium is the name of the word, but if you say it, the individual member of the gynoecium is what? It is the carpel or pistil. Collection of carpel or pistil, we call it as gynoecium. Now, it has a stalk, which we call it as style, and it has the receptive surface where the pollen grains come and sit. This surface we call it as the stigma, and this, the bulged part, the swollen part, which is found at the base of the gynoecium, we call it as the ovary, where the ovules are found inside. Where the ovules are found inside. Ovules are found inside. So, style, stigma, and ovary, these are the parts of carpel. So, all these together they make the carpel, and the collection of the carpels we call it as gynoecium. So, this is how a typical flower is. This is parts of a typical flower. Typical flower. Now, as you can see in this diagram, earlier it was just a stem which had a nodes. Now, when the shoot apical meristem transformed into floral meristem, what happened? Instead of leaves, the floral leaves are formed. What are the floral leaves? The sepal, the petal, you can say the stamen. This entire structure, including the anther and the filament, anther and filament, these are what? Stamen, male reproductive part. It is a male reproductive structure, whereas the carpel is the female reproductive structure. So, the stamen, the carpel, the sepal, the petal, these are the 4 floral leaves. So, when a shoot tip modifies, into floral meristem, you will see that instead of leaves, you will get all these floral leaves, which condenses, the axis get condensed. This is the structure how you will see. That's why it is flat, the flattened surface. This we call it as thalamus. This gets compact. When you press it, it will look like this. So you will see this one is sepal, this one is petal, and this one is stamen, whereas this which is inside, which is found, it is a tip. It is called as the carpel. Remember this, the carpel portion. So this is the typical, you can say, flower and its parts. Okay. So in the next class, we are going to understand the various terminologies related to the flower. Various. There are some terminologies which we often use while giving a description about any family. So we have two families which have to be discussed for you. That is the Liliaceae and Solanaceae. So when we write a description, we are going to use these technical terms or terminologies rather than explaining in length. We use the words, terms to define, to write a description of any particular plant. So this is how we are going to understand the flower. So in next class, I am going to start the discussion on the various terms.